Welcome to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WLH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Implementing and managing through large-scale change is always challenging. The impact on organizations, teams, and individuals can be profound. And while employees may be used to the organizational churn, the past couple of years have taxed organizations and individuals far beyond anything we could have ever imagined. Today, I'm pleased to talk to Andrew Moore, who is the General Manager of Pfizer CentreOne, as he will share some insights into navigating large-scale change. Welcome, Andrew. I'm so excited to have you join us today and to share your insights.
Thanks, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, you really exemplify somebody who's been navigating through large-scale change. And you and I know that much of the burden of successfully navigating change falls on the leader, yet no one could have anticipated the disruption created by the pandemic. So my first question to you is, what did you do to successfully guide your organization through this difficult period of massive disruption and change?
Wow, that's a very loaded question and lots to unpack in that question. You know, I like to think about it in this way. You ever been at home at night in the evening and the lights go out and the house is full of the family? What's the first thing you do is you grab your flashlight, right? And then you start finding individuals in the house, right? And you bring everyone together. Well, that's what I try to do with my team. You know, prior to the pandemic, I pretty much managed my team focused on the organization, the teams, and the individuals. In the midst of the pandemic, I had to reverse that thinking and really focus on communicating with the individual, making sure that every individual is on board, then bringing that together as a team, ensuring that the team's on board, right? Didn't worry so much about the organization. What I mostly worried about was how the team would execute. So it's a little bit reverse thinking. Typically we think, the opposite way, the organization, the teams, and the individuals, right? But in this situation, in order to have clarity and alignment, everything has to go down to the individual level first, right? And then build up to the team level and then to execution. Because of the pandemic, you're not able to meet regularly face to face. You're not able to see the body language and understand what's going on from all those nonverbal cues. Now you really, really have to focus on ensuring that everybody's aligned on the execution.
You and I spent a lot of time talking about this as we're working through the pandemic together. And I like the way that you framed it, because the truth is you have to start with the individual. I mean, one of the things that we saw through the pandemic is the leaders that demonstrated leadership empathy and paid attention to their team and connected did much better than other leaders and organizations that didn't. So I really like the fact that you're saying, first, going through that kind of massive disruption, it's check in with each and every individual and then roll up to the team and then to the organization. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think is really a good tip for people to be mindful as disruption will continue. So thank you for that. I have a follow-on. So given that so much of the disruption of the pandemic was completely unpredicted, how did you prepare yourself successfully to manage through this ambiguity? And how have you remained resilient and change agile despite the many challenges?
Another good question. Don't want to sound like it's really easy, because it's not. Truthfully stated is that I feel that each of us as leaders has spent our entire career planning for this without knowing we were planning for it. And what do I mean by that? Everything that we've learned along the way, we're getting comfortable in those uncomfortable situations. Being put into projects like a light speed project where you have to do things differently very quickly and being able to move on a dime. All those different things has prepared each of us as leaders on how to deal, with the pandemic. Although we, consciously it wasn't there, but subconsciously it's in our wheelhouse or our tool bag. I call it my duffel bag because I'm ex-military. So everything I've ever learned and I want to retain, I keep in my duffel bag. And when the opportunity comes and I need it, I can just, funnel around my duffel bag and pull out those tools. So I think our entire career has prepared us as leaders to sit back and say, okay, here's the new situation. How do I adapt and overcome? How do I find comfort in this uncomfortable situation?
So you're saying you were really ready to set and go, just based on all the years of training. And you have a pretty extensive background also coming from the military that I believe hones those leadership skills that maybe not every leader has, quite frankly. But what about the agility? Because I know that you flexed constantly through the last couple of years. What did that look like, and what guidance would you give to others that they remain agile as we anticipate there'll be more change that will happen?
Okay, it's a good question. And I like to break this question down into basically three parts. We all have a vision, right, on what we're trying to accomplish, right? We all have a strategy to support that vision, right? And we use our teams to execute that strategy. So those are the tactics, right? So the first thing that anyone should do is say, okay, here's a new situation. How do I remain agile without losing focus on the vision, without losing focus on the strategy? Now, how we execute may change based on the situation. And that's where the agility comes in. The vision and strategy are solid. They don't have to change. The how is what changes. And I like to think about it in these terms. I'm sure you've heard this before. The rules of 1,110. There's 1,000 things to do, right? 100 of them are important. 10 are going to move the needle. Well, of those 10, I like to focus on the top 3, low-hanging fruit opportunities, because number one, it's going to be easier to execute. We're going to learn from how we're executing and be able to apply those learnings to the things that are more difficult to get done during that time.
So your laser-like focus on the most important priorities was what kept you keeping your organization moving, performing, but the agility was flexing the how through the pandemic and the ways of working. I mean, in many ways, your teams are still working virtually, except people that are at manufacturing sites. Many people are still hybrid. So I think that's really good guidance. Just stay laser focused on what you want to accomplish, and then be flexible in the how based on the current situation and the time. So thank you. So here's another question for you. What advice, if you think about the newer leaders, the people who have been in leadership positions for so many years and in so many different types of organizations, what advice would you give to others about successfully navigating through massive disruption? Are there change management lessons you've learned that prepare you for that next big challenge?
I would say if you're young and an individual isn't that experienced, I would say number one is bring your team together and rely on your team. Your team has all the answers. All the experience is on your team. You have to be smart enough to sit back, listen to your team. All the answers will clearly start to surface. Your job as a leader is to be able to take those different elements that you don't understand and massage it and put it together in a cohesive strategy, and allowing the team to align around that strategy. So you don't have to have the answers. The answers are there. Your job as a leader is to be able to extrapolate those answers from your team and formulate a strategy around it and work with the team on how to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. And also your team are good bellwethers and people who provide insights as to what they're hearing on the ground, right? Because sometimes you don't hear everything. So I think it's listening a lot and leaning into the expertise of each and every individual. Is there anything else that you would say, as we look towards 2022 and hope to get back to some sense of normalcy, things that leaders need to worry about or think about to remain, have that leadership agility and stay focused on performance?
You know what, you must be a thought reader, because that's exactly what I actually spent this past weekend reflecting on, is what has changed since the pandemic. our operating model has changed. Now, of our operating model, as we come out of this pandemic, what's different about this model than it was previously? What do we want to keep, right? And how can we continue to build up on it and make it better? Because the one thing that I've learned during this pandemic is today, we are much better communicators because we have this medium we have to go through now, which has made us more efficient in how we communicate and not being able to fully rely on all the nonverbal cues. So if you think about it in those terms, there's a lot of lessons learned on how we have executed over the past 18 to 24 months. And of those things, what are the things we want to keep and what are the things we want to shed? Now, there are some advantages of coming back together. And I also believe there are some disadvantages because I honestly believe that my team has been more effective remotely than we were prior to the pandemic. And I think that's because of focus.
And I was going to say, you and I've talked a lot about it. I mean, they were relentlessly focused, and quite frankly, found ways to collaborate even virtually.
Right. And I think virtually in a lot of ways was easier because you don't have all the noise in the system, right? And you have to make a decision. So there are not a lot of sidebars going on. There's not, coffee breaks, having, external conversations that the whole team is not privy to. That's not happening, at least not to the extent that it does in the office, right? So when you come back together, everybody's focused on finding a solution. And I think you get there faster. So there are some pros and some cons to working virtually versus back in the office. So some of it I'm going to enjoy, and some of it I'm probably going to say, yeah, I wish we'd have stayed remote for some of this.
Right. Well, that's where hybrid is here. But, I think that one of the things I really appreciate is that you kind of break this down. First, check in with your people, right? Instead of doing this organizational team individual cascade, which we talk about all the time, you really needed to check in individually to build up the team to then impact the organization. And in times of stress or major disruption, it's important for leaders to be present and have empathy for each and every individual, and then to relentlessly prioritize everything you're doing that will move, and then be agile in the way in which you do it. So I think those are really valuable lessons as we continue with disruption, because you and I both know that more fundamental change is happening and will continue through this year. Every organization is revisiting their strategy, processes, people, all of that. So I think those are great lessons learned. Anything else as we start to close out today's podcast that we didn't touch on that would be important?
Just one thing I just wanted to reiterate again, and you talked about young leaders. And I haven't really given much thought to it, but as I was thinking through it, as a young leader, there are not a lot of resources out there, to really help guide through the process. So one of the recommendations that I would have for young leaders is to quickly find yourself a really good mentor, someone that you can call upon, and bounce ideas off of. You don't have to go it alone. And it's not new. Someone has already gone through the experience, so why not capitalize on someone else's experience, but yet make them your own as a young leader? Never lose sense of self. Be authentic about how you lead. But there's nothing wrong with plagiarizing other great ideas from other good leaders.
Absolutely. Creating a coalition of support, finding a mentor, finding somebody who can bounce ideas about, I think is great, especially for those emerging and new leaders. So I really want to thank you, Andrew, for today and for making the time to talk to our audience. You have so many valuable lessons learned, and I'm sharing them. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. I always enjoy talking with you. Thank you.
And what I would say is it was really wonderful to hear firsthand, how really your leadership agility helped you and your team and organization succeed in so many areas. What I want to share with our viewers is over the next 6 weeks, we're going to create this podcast series that will cover more elements of leadership agility in greater detail. We're going to explore, Andrew, which is the 5 C's of transition leadership, which was the basis of the book, Change and Thrive, Modern Approach to Change Leadership. So we'll be talking to others and providing practical tips and techniques to help you shore up your own leadership agility. So find that mentor, maybe tune in and learn some more as you go. So as we close out today's podcast, again, I want to thank Andrew for joining us. And if you're interested in learning more about how to successfully navigate change in your organization and our leadership agility learning programs, please feel free to reach out at WLH Consulting. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you next week.